Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Global Vue Meetup online. My name is Simone, and I'm a senior software engineer at Distot. Our sponsor today is Distot Labs, your partner in modern digital transformation. We specialize in mentorship, consulting, training, and staff augmentation for enterprise organizations. Find out more at distotlab.com or send us an email at hi@dis.co. We have fantastic events coming up almost every week. There's a list of events in this PowerPoint. We got the monthly mentoring session with Women in Tech. We got the global Angular, React, and Vue Meetup, such as this one. And you can just find information on our Twitter handler on Distot Media, or just join our website for more information. This month is also JavaScript Marathon month. So if you've never joined, we're hosting our next JavaScript Marathon in 2 weeks on October the 28th. JavaScript Marathon is a full day of live training on various frameworks and topics. This month, we have trainings on React hooks, 11.3, TypeScript, and GraphQL. And you can sign up on javascriptmarathon.com. Today, most of you are waiting for the great Ivan Yu, the creator of Vue.js and full-time open source contributor. This is an Ask Me Anything session. So it's going to be, a freestyle. All depends on the question you ask, and the conversation can go in, any direction that Ivan would like to bring us. It's probably going to be focused on V3, on what is coming next, and everything related to Vue. And as he's the only speaker, most of the time it's going to be on this discussion. Just to let you know, we are planning to accept questions in the chat. So if you have any question, you can write the question there. And then Ivan is going to try and find some of the questions, and is going to answer them depending from the topic, and trying to follow topics that is relevant for the whole community. So without waiting any more time, I think it's fantastic to just pass over the microphone and the stage to Ivan and just welcome him around.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you so much for being here. It's fantastic to have you around. I know that we chatted with you a couple of months ago when our main question was, when is Vue 3 going to be ready? And, finally the question is over. Yeah. Vue 3 is out, and now, let's it's time for the community to ask questions and to see how how you can be of help, and how you can enlighten us with your knowledge of this fantastic framework.
Sure. Yeah. I don't. Looks like people don't really have questions, huh?
Well, it probably takes some time to write. Usually, we do have around 40-ish seconds, delay. Okay. So, guys, please write questions. I do have my own set, and surely you got something that you may discuss yourself. Okay.
Oh, I see the first question.
Here we are.
Yeah. Okay. First question is: do you see Vite replacing the Vue CLI at some point, or is it just an alternative? So it's tough to say, because I guess it's best to briefly explain what Vite is. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting thing, because I worked on Vite before Vue 3 release, but we kind of put it on a hold, sort of just to get Vue 3 out of the door. But now that Vue 3 is out, I think I'm going to spend a bit more time into Vite. But I think it's good to just share some. Mm-hmm. I'm going to share my screen and just talk through some points on.
Great.
Yeah, on Vite. So Vite is, first of all, some French speakers know that Vite is French for rapid, quickly. I picked the name specifically because of that. Functionally, it's similar to Webpack plus Webpack Dev Server or Parcel. The scope, notice the scope. I'm not comparing to Vue CLI, because Vue CLI is a higher level tool. Vue CLI is built on top of Webpack and Webpack Dev Server, but it has more because it also includes project scaffolding. It has all these options to add, like linting or testing, and the ability to sort of build plugins in the Vue CLI ecosystem. So Vue CLI is a higher level thing. It has a much bigger scope than something like Vite or Webpack Dev Server, right? So functionally, Vite is the counterpart of Webpack and Webpack Dev Server. Now, is it going to replace Webpack? I would say it's not going to happen in the short term, because the biggest reason is because Vite is built on the premise of native ES modules, or I would call it ES modules first. Right? It's built from the ground up, assuming most, if not all, of your source code is written with ES modules. So no common JS somehow transpiled to work in the browser or anything like that. Just only the standard stuff. So that's the assumption. But we know that the ecosystem, it's not clear cut. All the standards kind of emerge over time. So we have such a huge ecosystem with a ton of packages. They don't even know they depend on some dependencies that's like common JS or not standard compliant. So sometimes it may not work in Vite, but like it's not really. So some people are like, okay, so we'll stick to Webpack because Webpack handles everything. But you see here, the problem is Webpack handles all these quirky cases. It's like quirks mode of IE. And because of that, people are fine to put up with all the non-standard stuff. So we are stuck with the status quo, right? So Vite is essentially an effort to give you this clean start where like, okay, here's a tool. It's fast, it's efficient. It has a very great, super fast development experience, but it only works with standard ES modules. If you want to get into this new ecosystem, you should, write all your own code in ES modules, obviously, and preferably you should pick dependencies that offer standard ES module distribution formats. And that's the whole, because it's kind of intentional. We don't invest more into this like legacy sort of quirky case compatibility in Vite. It's because, Webpack is already doing that, and it's not our sort of goal to sort of compete with Webpack for market dominance. It's really like Vite is here to, we're doing the same. We're actually attacking the same like problem space, but we're doing it in a way that we're only doing standard compliance stuff. And if you want to use this, great, you get a better development experience. But the primary goal is not to replace Webpack. That makes sense? So it's not like a zero-sum competition. It's like, it's an additional option. And with this kind of a, side goal of promoting more standard compliance package distribution practices. So that's really the main thing. So would it replace Vue CLI? Definitely not. But we don't rule out the potential of, swapping the internals of Vue CLI to use Vite.
Yes. Okay.
When the day comes, right? Like as of now, the ecosystem is far from catching up to full standard ES modules yet. Yeah. But hopefully Vite is going to help accelerate that progress so that one day we can actually swap things out. Or maybe Webpack, notices, Webpack is already doing something in V5, like they stopped polyfilling all these Node.js built-ins, which in my opinion is a good thing. It breaks a lot of stuff, but that's how you actually push the ecosystem forward. You kind of have to give something to gain something. So even if Vite does not end up replacing Webpack, that's fine. It definitely, it's going to push the ecosystem forward in some way.
And that's what we need. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Good. Anything else on Vite, or shall we try and see one more question? There's more question coming in the chat now.
Yeah.
So which one would you like to pick up? Let me see.
Okay. What is the best practice to use Vue 2 components in Vue 3? This is more like a migration problem. It really depends on how compatible how much affected APIs your Vue 2 components are using. I would say if you stick to most of the common public-facing APIs, you should be able to migrate a component to work with Vue 3 with relatively low effort. Typically, the harder part is having the whole application working, but a single component, in my opinion, isn't too difficult. Obviously, we haven't come up with a full suite of tools to help you do that more easily yet. The migration tool, code mods, So those are essentially the work that's scheduled for end of the year, like Q4.
Just so that you know, what I realized in last couple of weeks chatting with people in the community, people mean when they say Vue 3 component, they mean the composition APIs.
Yeah, that
So
might be the
everyone
thing.
thinks that actually is the new way going forward.
I mean, it definitely is a new way of doing things, but that doesn't mean you have to change all your existing Vue 2 components to use composition API, right? The options, like 90% of the options API still work exactly the same in Vue 3, right? So really, like if you have something that's working and you put it in Vue 3 and still works, then really like unless you're just doing that to maybe get more experience with composition API, I mean, that is a valid reason to do so. But like, if you don't have the time, I mean, really, like, you shouldn't make that a priority, right? Use it in new stuff. Yeah, my son just burst into the door.
I think everyone is used to this now after 6-7 months of working from home.
Home office issues.
That's good. So shall we go for another question?
Sure. Yeah.
Shall we see this one? Do you foresee any pattern emerging for large-scale application that Vue 3 offers that were just not possible with Vue 2?
I wouldn't say impossible, but like all the stuff that we used to do in Vue 2, say with mixings or hacky ways of sharing state between components, a lot of the things can be done in a cleaner, more maintainable, and more type-friendly way. That's the thing, right? A lot of times, like when we compare two different solutions, we can say it's possible to achieve the same end goal with two different types of APIs, but the difference really lies in how maintainable it is. That's the main thing that we want to kind of solve with Vue 3 is how can you make sure, like, when you're solving the problem, you don't feel like you're hacking it. You feel like, oh, this is actually the right way of abstracting this. And I know, like, 3 months later, when I look at this piece of code, I understand what I'm doing and I can actually maintain it for the long run. That's the important part, right? Because I feel like the options API doesn't sort of, I mean, like, people can obviously write maintainable code with options API, but it's just harder compared to with composition API. Like, composition API is a little bit more verbose, but say when you have cleanly extracted composable functions with like, especially with types, annotated inputs, annotated outputs, everything works with type inference. That's going to help you a lot in the long run. So that's the main difference.
That's true indeed, I think. Well, let's have a follow-up question. As being a host, I can jump through with follow-up question. I know that the V3 supports TypeScript now. So do you see this as being, kind of do you guys are going to support the use of TypeScript? So are you going to add it within your documentation? Are you going to push it through the community? Or do you think it's going to be just...
we definitely don't want to push it, right?
Yeah,
if you don't want to use TypeScript, just don't use it. And that's one of the biggest design challenges for Vue 3 is to make sure the API work the same with or without TypeScript. We don't want the experience to be completely different. We don't want to be like TypeScript or bust. That's definitely not where we're going. But we do have a lot of pretty enthusiastic TypeScript users. So that's why, like, it makes sense for us because, like, Vue is a flexible framework. We have a lot of different types of users. Some users like TypeScript, some users don't, right? We got to respect that. So we got to respect people who don't want to use TypeScript, but it doesn't kind of exclude us from, say, providing better TypeScript support for those who do love it.
It's a great answer. I can see probably loads of Angular developers now being able to come around as very TypeScript dependent.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yes. Let me see. Any other question that we can see right here? It's quite hard to read the question and answer the question at the same time.
Yeah. I see a question about the single file components, multiple subcomponents in the same file thing.
Let me see. You go. You start and answer it, and I'll press it.
How did I press it?
No, I'll press it. You start to answer
Okay.
the question, and I'll put it on.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so the question really is like, how can you have multiple subcomponents in the Vue single file component? Now, the technical answer right now is if you want to use the single file component format or have templates, style blocks in script, multiple templates, multiple script blocks, multiple style tags, that is not possible, but you can have inline functional components written in pure JavaScript. You can actually use, say, the Vue render function syntax to have inline small components inside the script block of a single file component. If that's really necessary, yeah. That's one thing, because in practice, I think for React developers, they may have the habit of breaking stuff into a lot of tiny, small components, just like you break things up into functions. But in Vue, your templates, the thing is in Vue, your templates and your logic is a bit more decoupled. So we tend to have relatively larger templates, larger components, but composition API allows you to break the logic of the components into smaller bits. And you can sort of organize these logic into functions, and you can even extract them out of the component. So I think it's an interesting thing. It's just like a lot of React developers coming to Vue have been asking for that. But like a lot of Vue first developers kind of never realized they actually need that. So it's an interesting thing. One of the technically we can obviously find syntax to support that, but like it just risks making single file components really bloated. So for React developers, my recommendation would be just to do inline functional components. It's almost the same as in React. So
that's you're right, probably because in Vue they'll be more decoupled, so it's not really it wouldn't actually work the same if you try to do it within a single function format. Okay, good.
Okay, so here's another one. Says, any plan to provide a full server-side rendering example similar to Vue Hacker News 2 using Vite? That's a good question. I should probably do that. So there is an item in our to-do that is documentation for server-side rendering in Vue 3, because that is still kind of a to-do in our docs at the moment. So I think, yeah, it's a good suggestion. We should probably do the Vite Hacker News as sort of a companion for the documentation. I think that would serve well.
Thanks. So yeah, don't forget to add his name on the documentation. A simple question for you: what are you most looking forward now that Vue 3 has been released?
Looking forward to? It's weird because before Vue 3 release, it's always like, this release is the thing that we're all working towards. And now after release, I guess I'm in a period of adjustment where I'm trying to actually figure out the priorities, because we still have a lot of stuff to do. But now that the release is already out, I guess priority is sort of a interesting problem, because I personally prefer to do focus cycles where like for maybe a week or two, I'll focus on one thing and one thing only. That's what makes me most efficient. So in terms of looking forward to, there's so many things. It's hard. Kind of have to get to them one by one.
Okay.
Well, if I have to pick one, probably getting Vue Press really solid. Yeah, because that's going to it's the whole loop of Vue 3 with server-side rendering, client-side hydration, all the payload optimizations, and even some of the exciting stuff we're trying to do with server-side rendered applications that allows you to like skip hydration or drop payload on demand. Like you can annotate in your templates. I mean, right now, what Vue Press already does is you can have a Markdown file where you can embed our Vue components anywhere in the Markdown file. The whole file is compiled as a Vue template so that all the dynamic bits work. But the compiler is smart enough to detect all the static parts from your Markdown. Notice that they're static. Throw them away from the JavaScript payload so that you're not like sending all the strings in JavaScript to the client and then just to hydrate them for nothing, right? And also during the hydration, the generated virtual DOM tree actually also kind of skips all these static parts. So you're only iterating over the dynamic nodes and hydrating those and sort of just fast forward skipping all these static stuff. So that's going to be a whole lot more efficient than, say, if you're using MDX with Gatsby, for example. You're actually sending double payload to the client, one in HTML, one in JavaScript, and then hydrating all these static nodes, which is very inefficient.
It's good. So, thinking for the future, making server-side rendering work, as performant as possible.
Yeah.
That's good. So I don't know if you see any of the other questions you would like to answer. This one about Laravel. If you know about Inertia.js.
Laravel full stack developer community is inclined towards Vue nowadays. Inertia.js is also in place for better experience. How do you see handshake between Inertia and Vue in the future? I think Inertia is interesting. Like, to be completely honest, I haven't fully played with it in too much depth, so I only briefly know what it's doing. But I think it's a very interesting way of doing things. I mean, I also know there's Livewire, which is, another interesting direction. And I think that's cool, like, because we sort of, I think for the past few years, we're sort of kind of presented with either go full server side with some client stuff, or we're all like full client side or full server side rendering. I think Inertia and Livewire are really exploring different ways of doing things. And I mean, personally, I'm actually very curious to see how this space plays out and how Vue can play a part of it. But I think they're cool. But like, honestly, as I said, I haven't really dig too deep into it, but I think I should.
Good. Next question, I would say, what sort of time frame do you think you'll be looking for before Vue 3, Vuex, and Vue Router ecosystem is mature enough to start building new production application?
I would say they are stable enough to start to build production stuff with right now. What we're really lacking is just DevTools integration, which we should probably try to get out. I mean, so whether you are comfortable using it now kind of depends on your how comfortable you are with, say working with these without the DevTools support. And if you know TypeScript, that's going to be a big plus because it's easier, because all of these are now source code, their source code are written in TypeScript now. If you can read TypeScript, reading the source code actually serves you better than even reading the docs sometimes, because just by looking at the signature and the types, you kind of understand what's going on. But like stable-wise, the code quality-wise, I'd say they are stable. They are production ready. The ecosystem may not have fully catched up yet. Supporting tools and ecosystem is the lacking part, but the code themselves are production ready. What is the best way to migrate existing large apps to latest versions of Vue? From Vue to so this is kind of the question everyone's asking. The best way is something we're working on, the migration stuff. We have a migration build. So some people have already been doing manual migrations based on the migration guide on the V3 docs. It's a list of breaking changes that you kind of have to code through yourself, but not everybody is comfortable or willing to do that. So, which is why we are working on this. First of all, a migration build where, so our strategy is essentially all these breaking changes. There are 3 categories. One is something that can just automatically be updated. Like we have a few code mods that just scans your source code, notice that, oh, you're using the Vue 2 API, let's just rewrite it to use Vue 3 API. So these are the easiest ones. We can do it automatically. The second type is something that might involve multiple changes across multiple files that cannot simply be changed in place. So this then falls into, one, we can provide behavior compatibility at runtime. So essentially, we still support the old Vue 2 usage, but we will give you a warning saying, hey, look at this docs. Here's the way to change it. Right? So this is what the migration build is aiming to do. And the third, if there's no way to provide a compatible behavior at runtime with both supporting both Vue 2 and Vue 3 behavior, then the tool that scans your code base will notice that and probably just give you a hard warning saying like this part you have to kind of change yourself just by looking at the docs. So that's the whole strategy. We're hoping this would cover most of the cases. So if you are you don't want to say read the current list of breaking changes and do all of them yourself, I would suggest you just wait for that, which will make your life a lot easier. And
did you say that the delivery of it was end of the year? You're aiming for the end of the year.
So that's planned for Q4. It might come earlier than that, but yeah, a moderate, conservative estimate is end of year.
Okay, Christmas present for us then.
Hopefully, yeah.
So another question for you is here. We love to hear the best part about Vue 3 in your words.
Best part, highlights. I would say Composition API helps you tackle scaling problems much more confidently. And performance-wise, I'm pretty proud of the performance improvements we've pulled off in Vue 3. You might not it's not something you can feel in when you use it, but it's like just the way we architect internals so that we have a much more efficient runtime update performance. It's pretty cool. It can be up to 2 to 3 times faster in certain cases, which I think is pretty impressive based on, Vue 2 isn't really slow, but we're able to make Vue 3 a lot more faster.
That's amazing. And which one would you say is which one would you say is the feature that has been accepted the least by the community? Or if, have you had loads of questions or something on a specific feature?
I don't know, honestly. I think a lot of these features like fragments or teleports are sort of, it's like you use them in cases where you need them. It's not something like give you sort of super fancy new capabilities. But I think Composition API is something that a lot of people are excited about. Some of the new stuff very few people will probably end up using is the custom renderer stuff. You can use the runtime core to build your own custom renderer. People are already using that to say build a WebGL renderer. So you can do that, which is pretty cool, but I guess very few people will actually end up doing it because you'd only do that when you're really doing some very niche use cases. But nonetheless, it's still very powerful because you can build whole new platforms on top of it, like native script Vue integration. They're already working on Vue 3 support using that API.
Good. So another question from Byron Ferguson is, what are your thoughts regarding micro frontends and web components and how V3 fits in the larger picture?
Personally, Honestly, like I just think micro front ends is kind of a buzzword. Like microservices, like
Yeah.
sometimes you kind of, they have their places, right? They have the scenarios where they would be the good fit, but it's not like a hammer that would fit every nail. It's like microservices when it first came out on the server side. People are like, oh yeah, we need to migrate everything to microservices. And a year later, they're like, we regret doing this.
Yeah.
Right? You kind of have to hit the nail. Like when you actually have a problem to solve that fits your hammer, then you do it. But I just think micro front ends is more like, if you have only one team working on one product, what's the point? Right? Micro front ends is more like, I remember someone said this on Twitter. I forgot the one who said it, but they said micro front ends is a solution to more of an organizational problem rather than a technical problem.
Team, yes.
Yeah.
To build around the team, yes, you're right.
Yeah, because you have different teams and the teams are not communicating efficiently enough, or you can't find a way to enforce a consistent tech stack across your teams. That's why some people are like, okay, micro front ends. But the thing is, if you think about, say, the worst case scenario, like you have a single web app with 4 to 5 micro front ends, each using their own stack. You're loading 5 frameworks on the same page. Like that's going to be a disaster in terms of performance, right? And then all the knowledge sharing across your teams, say, right? So then people are saying like, oh, if you want to share your usability across these micro front ends, use web components. But hey, web components only encapsulates an element, something visual loading on the page. It does not provide consistent way of, say, sharing stateful logic, sharing how you fetch data, sharing how you resolve business logic. Like none of that. Web components does not solve that problem.
Yeah.
Right. So I just personally feel it's a direction worth exploring, but it's not something I personally feel like I'm super excited about. It's just yeah, that's honestly how I feel about it.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Yeah. Let's see what the industry brings us.
Yeah.
Good. So let's see. Another question for you. Would Vue reactivity be one of my highlight of Vue 3? Would even be possible to share logic between platforms? For example, Vue composable hooks using a web app in React Native.
Technically, you can. You can. It should be pretty straightforward to just use the Vue reactivity package in a way like you use MobX with React. That's totally feasible. So yeah, technically it's a yes. It just depends on if anyone is interested in doing it. Yeah.
Of course. Question for you from myself. What is, I know that the browser support of Vue 3, is not going to include I11 out of the box, but the I11 is coming out. So what is the timeline on the I11, and which one are the major features that the I11, the I11 version will kind of not have, or will have it polyfilled, if you want.
Sure. Yeah. So mainly the I11 build is going to have the same reactivity limitations of Vue 2.
Yep.
Which means we cannot detect newly added properties after the object has been made reactive. So if you want something to be reactive, the property has to be there before it's made reactive.
Using the set.
Yeah, you have to still use vue.set and but that's pretty much it. So essentially, the I11 build is going to, like, there are some still technical details that we still need to validate, but the idea is the I11 build will have both the proxy version and the getter-setter version of the framework. so that you get the proxy-based performance in newer browsers. But in I11, it just falls back to the getter setter version.
People just need to make sure that they develop it, but remember to use this.set.
So here's the thing, right? So Vue.set, right? You don't need it if you have proxies, but you do need it in I11. So how can you make sure you don't forget? So here's the thing, right? In the proxy-based version, we know that this build has to support I11.
Okay.
So if you add a new property to an object, we can actually detect that. So we tell you, hey, we notice you're adding a property after this object is already reactive, but this won't work in I11.
Wow.
And you are trying to support I11, so you should use Vue.set. So that's what we're going to do.
It's amazing. I was going to say, otherwise, can you imagine how many times you'll see, it works on my machine because people develop it in code.
Definitely don't want that to happen, right? That's the thing we've been thinking about all the time. Yeah,
that's fantastic. You saved hundreds of live release bug production and things like that. So maybe another question here. A lot of people are leaning towards using Composition API function for global state management rather than Flux Life architecture. What's your recommendation?
Yeah, it's actually a good discovery, right? People notice that a reactive object is actually the simplest form of shared state store you can use. And I think that's valid. Depends on the scale of the application, obviously. Say if you are one single developer and you don't need server-side rendering, that's totally fine. I would actually personally just do that if it's a personal project or something. But Flux-like architecture, say Vuex, especially with Vue 3, right? Vuex is going to be a really thin layer on top of Vue 3, and the main benefit it brings is this sort of convention, code organization conventions. You know that, say, a component is not allowed to directly mutate shared state, which if you're using, say, an imported object, technically any component importing that object can just mutate it in place. I mean, if you wrote all the code, you know where they're going to happen. But if you have a team of multiple people and you're like, hey, why is this state changing? Like, oh, okay, then you notice another developer imported the same thing into their component and then just do weird things there, right? That's what makes team collaboration difficult. So having something like a Flux architecture kind of ensures no one is just doing weird things in their components. All the things happen in the store. And if you want to mutate state, you have to do it in here, inside mutations. And that's where which file, so you know, like, okay, something weird is happening. I better check the mutation log. Okay, it's actually changed by this thing that's in this file, right? Just making things a bit more predictable, easier to maintain, especially when there are multiple people trying to touch the same thing. So it's a trade-off, right? It obviously makes your code more verbose, more ceremonial, but a lot of times it's the kind of typical trade-off where you use a bit more verbosity and enforced convention to make sure everyone's on the same page, to make the long-term collaboration smoother.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. 100% agree on that. Everything you said is like spot on of the situation which you see. Using a Flux architecture, easy to maintain, easy to know where the issues are. Instead of scattered code around the components.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like this sort of trade-off, like the verbosity, you still want to reduce the verbosity as much as you can, which is why we are thinking of how we can make, say, the next iteration of UX look more like just plain Vue composition API code, but still at the same time sort of still have that a little bit of convention that you can follow so that your code is more readable. Like personally, in my opinion, some of the Flux implementations are way too verbose. Like you have to jump through hoops to do one simple thing, which is not what we really want to force people to do. It's really finding the balance.
Of course. Okay. Well, there's this question from Axel. of course, we're not sponsored by any, and not yourself. But is there anyone out there that caught your attention somewhat that you would suggest people to follow up if he's a person or if he's I don't know, school or nothing?
Honestly, 100% honest, I have never watched a Vue course from the internet.
Of course,
I just inevitably get bored halfway.
You know them well enough.
Yeah,
I think you should know. I think you know Vue.
Yeah, so I don't think I should make a specific recommendation here, since I have never watched any of them to the end. But I know there are. Well, it's tough, right? Because I don't want to sort of turn this into a official endorsement kind of like thing. So honestly, like the only thing I can think of is Vue Mastery and Vue School. These are the people I have directly worked with, so I can't really say for anything else. Like I know there are a few popular courses on Udemy, but honestly, I don't know them well enough to actually make any sort of recommendation or say judgment of quality. That's really not something I can do.
Vue Mastery and Vue School, they're both amazing, to be honest. So,
nice.
They're very up to date as well. So supportive for everyone. Let's go. Another question. What CI strategy do you feel works best with Vue 3 if the goal is to support atomic deploy? So build and deploy only what is changed.
I don't know if it's even possible in general for front end to actually do it in that way. Like, because most of the major build tools does not really support atomic builds or incremental builds, right? I think what you're talking about is more like incremental builds, like build, deploy only what's changed. I would say unless your build is so slow that's like taking hours, most of the time I would just do, because atomic and incremental is not really the same thing, right? If you want atomic or immutable deploys, I mean, a lot of platforms already do that, like Netlify, Vercel, they all do immutable deployments. But you're doing a fresh build every deploy, that's for sure. But I think it's kind of a typical standard for front end nowadays. I mean, even if your build takes like 10 minutes, it's acceptable because you're not going to be pushing a commit every 10 minutes to CI. So I would say just go with something like that. Like just do a fresh build when you deploy.
If you have any more details, Valerie?
Yeah, this is a bit of, there are a lot of different constraints or technical detail we can dig into, but.
Yeah, of course. Another question, are there any tools for developing Vue with TDD or BDD style?
Yeah, we have an official test utils if that's your, for running unit tests, if that's your thing. Although my personal recommendation is a very strict TDD type of development flow is more well suited for a common, say, UI library that this component is going to be reused a lot. These are the type of components that's worth doing strict unit testing for. But like transaction, or like, I mean, in the front end, a lot of times, design change, your business needs change. Front end in general is a very fast moving kind of thing, right? You often have to tweak things over and over. It's very easy for you to say invest a lot of time into initial set of unit tests, and then they're all useless if something changes because the whole behavior changes, right? You might just end up investing more time into fixing the tests than actually implementing new features. It could slow you down in some cases. So you kind of have to make a call where to sort of see for yourself whether this is actually worth it. I think on a investment return sort of perspective, it's probably better to do end-to-end tests first, and only do TD like unit tests if you feel like it's going to be worth it for the long run. Like like this piece of code is going to be stable. It's not going to change. Let's make sure it's rock solid. Then that's the time you do it. So yeah, but I mean, if you know for sure you want to do TDD, there are tools for it, right? Test utils, and you can run Vue unit tests with Jest or Mocha. Most of the mainstream test runners, we have support for that in the Vue CLI.
It's amazing. I totally agree. Again, it's the front end is too fast forward. Did unit tests for many times, and then you end up spending loads of time trying to catching up. So usually we use a storybook in an epi medium where you actually just do the visual part of it instead of an actual test itself.
Yeah.
We have more question coming in. I'm not going to ask a question about the tabs or spaces, otherwise it's going to be. Is there anything you would like?
Just read the source code. You'll see my choices.
Is there anything that you'd like to see make its way to the Vue Dev Tools that isn't there yet? That's a nice question.
Yeah. So here, Guillaume actually already worked on something called the timeline view. It's already in there. Currently, it only logs events, like click events or component emitted events. But it has a lot of potential. Like we're already playing with, because he designed it to be pluggable. So other Vue DevTools modules, say the router module, can inject its own events into this event view. So say when you switch a route, you get a route event. You can hover over it and see, oh, I switched from this route to that route at this time point. It's all like on a timeline, right? And then for Vuex, obviously, you see all your mutations plotted on it. And it has a lot of potential in my opinion. And he even designed it to allow, say, you can add your own plugin to the Vue DevTools to add your own stuff to the timeline. So it's I think it has a lot of potential and pretty interesting. I think Posva is already working on some of that for the router. But we'll have to wait a bit before that comes out. Still, I think that's the thing to watch out for in the DevTools.
That's amazing. That's amazing indeed. Question for you. So I do know that, as most of us know, the Vue 3 has been a kind of full rewrite of the whole code base, it's more structure, much easier for people to think. And something that I heard you saying in the past that is easier for people to contribute because it's cleaner now. So if people would like to start to contribute, where do you think where should they go, or what is the best way to start?
So if you're comfortable with TypeScript, I think it would be straightforward to just jump into the code base and read it. Start from the APIs. Say when you start a normal Vue 3 app with create app. So you just go to the create app file and read from there. You can follow everything, jump around to definitions, see their type signatures. Honestly, I think TypeScript makes the code base much more readable if you know TypeScript. And that's why we are seeing some contributors, like their first contribution is some pretty non-trivial stuff. Like they dig deep into the code base because they can follow it around. Unlike Vue 2, honestly, sometimes when I go back to the Vue 2 code base, I'm like, wow, this is a lot harder to follow along than the Vue 3 source code.
For an open source, that's fantastic, isn't it? This is what you want to achieve.
Yeah. So I would say if you are not comfortable with TypeScript, docs would be the best way to start contributing. Otherwise, I would say become comfortable with TypeScript and then read the source code, and or you can just look at the issue list. Some of the issues are pretty low-hanging fruits. We have a lot of people are currently they submit fixes to the issues faster than I do. I focus on some other repos for a day or two. I come back, I see, someone already fixed it. That's great.
That's fantastic. That's what you want. That's what you want,
exactly.
I think.
That's what I want.
Let me see. Let's talk about Byte. You do say Byte?
Vite.
Sorry, apologies. Is there a plan on possibly use Vite as part of Vue CLI, make Vue CLI as fast as Vite during development, or add Vite be a second option if you're not using the Vue CLI?
Currently, it's more like Vite and Vue CLI are two different alternatives. That's the current plan, because we know the majority of users still want to be able to use any dependency they pull from npm. They still want to support all the browsers, because Vite actually builds, even the production build of Vite requires native VS modules. It also doesn't do any transpilation by default. It basically is like modern stack. Everything is modern, right? So that's not for everyone, right? Not everyone has the luxury to build only for modern browsers. So Vue CLI is here to stay. It's also a larger scope project, but as I said, one day maybe in the future, when the modern front end today has become actually something that's mainstream, like everybody can just assume we have full native ES module support, then that's the day we can swap, swap the internals of Vue CLI to use Vite, maybe.
Good. Next question. How do you come up with a name for each of the Vue release? Included in one piece for Vue 3, I noticed the anime theme.
Yeah, if you check all the historical releases, it's actually in alphabetical order.
Like Uragan. Fantastic.
Yeah, so look at I think it's on the Wikipedia page for Vue, like people have listed. So you can see all the code names in the past.
Good catch, value.
There's even a repo on GitHub that's like people are making bets for the next code name.
I was actually going to say the same. If you are a gold patriot on a contributor, you can actually choose one letter of the next name.
Yeah.
Next question. Do you see any close competitors for Vue, or even if not close, anything else coming up, such as Svelte, or anything else that you think is gonna, disrupt the ecosystem again?
I think Svelte is definitely pretty interesting. It gets a lot of attention because it claims to be tiny, right? Produce very small bundles, to be very performant. Svelte v3, its component syntax is also pretty, very concise, right? I mean, I definitely see a lot of potential in this direction, but I don't I don't tend to agree, say this is the future, like all the frameworks have to be done in this way, right? I think Svelte is a very cool exploration in the direction of doing as much in the compiler as possible, but it's not I would say anything has trade-offs, so you take it to the extreme, right? When you do so much in the compiler, so first of all, it's not really compiling away the framework. The framework is still there, right? So if you look at the code generated by Svelte, it's still importing all these things from, say, Svelte runtime, right? That's the framework, right? You're just not writing those import statements yourself. So there is still some runtime you have to import. I mean, obviously it's very lean, right? Svelte is designed from the ground up to be very lean, but it's not like there's no cost at all. Another aspect of it is for the same amount of template, if you compare the size of, say, feed the same piece of template to Svelte in the Vue compiler, the output size of Svelte is significantly larger because it's generating all these instructions for every node that's inserted. The difference, last time I checked, the output size difference is approximately 50%.
Okay.
which is actually non-trivial, right? So you have this, so Svelte is trading for a 0 baseline size for more code per line of source code you write. Slightly more code generated based on the same line, same amount of template, right? So, I mean, put it in some, like, so I haven't validated the numbers. I'm just making an example. Say if you have a component with a 100-line template, maybe Svelte generates, say, 3 KB worth of code, but the Vue equivalent is maybe 2 KB. Right? So that's an example, right? That's not the exact numbers, right? If you want to validate these, you can try it themselves. So then you end up with 2 curves, right? So Svelte starts at 0. Vue 3 has the baseline size around 15 KB with compression minification. So we start at 15, Svelte starts at 0, and you see the 2 curves growing at different slopes. And eventually there will be an inflection point where it crosses some certain threshold. Then after that point, the Svelte application will actually be heavier than the Vue application. Could it be possible for Svelte to make their slope lower? I think it's definitely possible, but I don't think it's possible for it to be so low that it actually never crossed that threshold. Yeah. It's really just where the inflection point is. But the thing is, I mean, a 15 KB baseline really isn't that bad.
I was going to say, we're not talking about huge amount. You see?
And the thing is, right, when you're building an application for a library that's only 15 KB, that's not going to be the majority of your bundle, unless you're building a to-do MVC all day, right? Yeah. So likely any non-trivial application, you're going to have like 20, 30 components or something. So the inflection point is going to be pretty close, right? Most of the application will probably be around the same size. It's not going to be significant.
Correct. Yeah.
And this difference gets more obvious if you are building large-scale applications, say 100 or 200 components. For sure, I'm pretty sure if you have a project of 100 components, the Vue application is going to be lighter.
Let's wait and see. Let's wait for the community to try out.
Someone actually did the comparison with React, I think. So they compiled some React stuff with the Svelte stuff. I think this inflection point for React is 120 or 80 KB of source code size, or something like that, which, in my opinion, is pretty common in real world cases, right? 80 KB.
Yeah. It's not a big app. It's 100K.
Yeah, people ship like megabytes of JavaScript bundles, right?
Oh yes, I've been there.
Yeah, I mean you can code split obviously, but
of course,
still, I just don't think the size advantage that Svelte advertises is not as big of an advantage some people perceive to be, right? And in terms of performance, I would say yes, Svelte strategy is probably the most performant out there right now. But it's only for, say, certain cases. It's also a specific case. Like, say, when you are trying to compare like list reordering performance, that's a whole different story. Any framework has to do the same sort of list comparison to do list reordering, which is why if you look at this, say, there is a popular benchmark where all the frameworks render 1,000 items, trying to move them around, toggle them. Svelte is not really the fastest. Right. And then, so what Svelte is really good at is the case where you have, say, a template with a lot of static stuff, but with only one dynamic piece inside of it, right? Svelte essentially can ignore all the rest and only generate one single line in its update function to say, hey, update this piece of text. So this is what makes it super, super efficient, the case. But Vue 3 essentially kind of optimized for the exact same case, in the sense that the compiler, we're basically, we are learning a lot from, say, Svelte, because Svelte is going this whole, like, let's compile as much as we can. Vue 3 is also trying to use the compiler to do as much as we can. So we analyze the template, see, okay, these parts are static. So the vnodes for them really only need to be generated once on the initial render. And then on subsequent renders, we don't even regenerate the V nodes anymore. We just reuse the same V node, and we're not even touching them. The only nodes we are tracking are the dynamic ones. So we're only patching the dynamic nodes. So the cost is essentially reduced drastically. And in some of the benchmarks I did, the raw update performance of Vue in a, say, probably 1:4 static, 1:4 dynamic static ratio piece of content in a huge list, it actually outperforms Svelte. So I have this whole benchmark where there's Svelte lit HTML, which also performs really well. React, Preact, and everything. I just, I never published it because it may trigger some people. So
yes. This one argument you know, as soon as you press the publish button is.
So I don't want to turn it into a flame war, but in certain cases, Vue 3 actually outperforms Svelte in terms of raw update performance. I mean, it's a very narrow case, right? It's just only this specific type of content. It's only the update performance. We're not talking about mount or real world cases where components are involved, right? So it's not a blanket claim that Vue 3 is faster than React, but just so that, in the cases where Svelte should technically be the most efficient, Vue 3 is also doing really well, right? So that is to say, right? Even virtual DOM, so the significant part about this is Vue 3 actually retains full compatibility with traditional virtual DOM. So you can mix a handwritten component using handwritten render functions like in React, where you get more flexibility. You can use that in another component which uses templates. So the template-based component is super optimized, but then you can mix these manually written render functions inside of it, right? And sometimes that makes sense because there are a lot of type of components where you have to use render functions because almost every node in this template is dynamic. Right? So there are cases you need to do that. And in those cases, compiler-based optimization really can't do much because everything is already dynamic. So what's the point in trying to optimize it, right? So that's the thing, right? So Vue 3 is sort of, we don't give up virtual DOM because it's valuable in a lot of cases, especially library authors. Sometimes it's just more straightforward to write some complex logic components using the render function rather than trying to juggle everything in templates. I mean, it's just something people kind of ask me all the time, so I try to expand a bit on this.
No, it's fine. And I think it's a question that the community is asking themselves. So it's a fantastic, nice that you gave a proper answer. Thank you so much.
So personally, I've just, overall, I feel like Svelte is definitely very interesting, in the kind of in the way it sort of handles the compiling your components into something. And I think it's competitive, definitely competitive. But like Vue 3 is in the design process, we definitely make sure the problems that Svelte is kind of solving, we're not really, say, doing worse in any sense, right?
Of course. You've seen in the ecosystem, all React, Angular, and Vue, we kind of all learning from each other. So, there's, we can see that trend. So I think, let's do the last question. We ask you loads of questions, and it's been fantastic to have you. The time is up now, but, nice question from Amit. So your message to the community. So first of all, thank you so much from my side and from everyone that is here and everyone that is actually working on Vue for everything you guys done. And I know how hard you've actually worked to have Vue 3 accomplished. So we, really, really thank you so much for a fantastic framework. And then your message to us.
Just enjoyed it. I mean, I guess what makes me happy is I can work on something I personally enjoy, and there was a bit of pressure leading up to the release of Vue 3, but overall, I still think I'm much more happier, say, when I work for someone else under a deadline, under a real deadline. That's a lot more stress. So I just think I'm really lucky to be in the position I'm in right now. So, and that is because, all the users with all the support. So so I think I just hope everyone can enjoy working with code and not feel like it's something you have to drag yourself into. That's really like, especially when you're working with Vue. I just feel like I guess the goal of Vue is just to make this experience of working on the code every day a bit more enjoyable. That's really all I'm trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and you're really hitting the nail there, because everyone, at least every single person I talk to, so happy to play with Vue. I say the word play, because it's really, really enjoyable to actually develop with Vue.
Thanks.
So time is up. I don't know if you want to add anything else, Steven.
That's it. Thank you.
Okay. In that case, thank you so much, everybody, for joining. Don't forget that this video is actually going to be recorded, so the YouTube channel of this dot. And thanks so much again, Evan. And I'll see you later for the V4. Okay. We're ready.
Not
next month. Okay. Take care. Thank you so much again. Bye bye.